Good morning. Mrs. Wedlick wanted to show you a couple things. First of all, remember the radish cure chapter? I had to run up to Dollar General yesterday, and guess what I found, guys? There's a package of radish seeds, and I wanted to show you how small they really were in case you've never planted radishes. I don't really like them, so I don't plant them, but I always buy the package just for this purpose. I have taken, and what you can see, I took a piece of cardstock and I taped a dime. So if you know what size a dime is, or if you have a dime, you can check it. But look at this teeny tiny little speck. That is the size of a radish seed next to a dime. So it wasn't very big that the mom and dad had to plant on the little girl in all of her dirt. Still gross if you ask me. Okay, we have 2 more chapters. This is chapter 7 called The Slow Eater Tiny Bite Taker Cure. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Alan. He had curly brown hair and sturdy legs and a very shiny smile. One morning he sat down to breakfast, but instead of picking up his spoon and eating his mush and milk like a good little boy, he took a fork and began eating his cereal grain by grain. Now imagine, how many of you have ever eaten rice? Mrs. Wedlick likes rice. But when you go to eat your rice, you usually take a spoonful or a forkful and you put it in your mouth. But he would take his fork and he would get just one teeny tiny little piece of rice and eat just that one tiny piece of his mush. When his mother, certain that he had eaten all of his mush, brought him his egg, he was still on his 11th grain of cereal. 11. Alan's mother said, "My goodness, you are poky this morning, dear. What is the matter? Is the mush too hot?" Then she noticed that Alan was eating his cereal with a fork, so she took the fork away and handed him a spoon, saying, "Now then, eat properly and hurry or your egg will get cold." Alan took the spoon, but instead of filling it with mush, he daintily lifted one grain from the bowl and slowly brought it up to his mouth. His mother watched him for a few minutes and then said, "Well, eat a nice cold egg if you like, but I am going upstairs to sort the laundry, and when I come down, I want to find every bit of that mush and all of the egg eaten." Alan's mother went skipping upstairs and left Alan in the breakfast nook. As soon as his mother left the kitchen, Alan picked up his fork again and began eating his mush by the grain. In a little while, even a whole grain seemed like too much, so he broke each grain in 2, taking only half grains on the fork tines. He was so interested in his little bitty bites that he didn't hear his mother come in and was very surprised when she suddenly whisked away his breakfast and sent him marching up to his room. At lunchtime, Alan's mother made cream of tomato soup. This was Alan's very favorite soup, but Alan, instead of eating it up quickly and asking for more, began floating little specks of cracker in the bowl. He floated, chased, and ate them one by one. At 2 o'clock, his mother stopped the little cracker crumb chase, sadly cleared the table, and sent Alan up for a nap. At dinner that night, Alan cut his meat into such small pieces that his father looked over at him and said, "Perhaps you would like to borrow my magnifying glass? I am sure you are going to need it to see those infinitesimal bits of meat." Alan's mother said, "He has been like that all day. eating his mush grain by grain with a fork, floating tiny cracker crumbs in his soup, and chasing and eating them one by one. And now this meat. What is the matter with you, Alan? Alan smiled his shining smile and said, I guess I'm just a slow eater. I choke if I take larger bites. His mother said, Nonsense! You were all right yesterday. Alan said sadly, Yes, Mother, but that was yesterday. And he carefully cut a grain of corn into 4 pieces and delicately put the smallest piece into his mouth. The next morning he had not improved a bit. And though his mother scolded and scolded, he took the smallest, slowest bites imaginable, and to make matters worse, he sighed and gazed around the room between each bite. Alan's mother was very distressed, and not knowing what else to do, she called her friend, Mrs. Crankminer. Good morning, Mrs. Crankminer, said Alan's mother. This is Alan's mother, and I called to ask if you ever had any difficulty with Wetherell about eating. Difficulty? Said Mrs. Crankminer. Just what kind of eating difficulty? Well, said Alan's mother, Alan has suddenly taken to eating so slowly that if I didn't take his plate away, I'm sure that it would take him approximately 12 hours to eat an average meal. He eats his cereal grain by grain, his soup drop by drop, and his meat pour by pour. Goodness gracious, is the child ill? Asked Mrs. Crankminer. No, he says that he feels well, and I have taken his temperature, and it is normal. I don't know what the trouble is, said Alan's poor worried mother. Mrs. Crankminer said, I certainly have no complaint about Wetherell's eating. My only difficulty is in getting him to stop. Yesterday morning before breakfast he weighed 182 pounds, and his father has begun calling him Blimpy. Oh my, said Alan's mother, I guess you have a more serious problem than I have, and she hung up the phone. Then she called her friend, Mrs. Wingsproggle. Mrs. Wingsproggle, she said, do you have any trouble with pergola at mealtimes? Mrs. Wingsproggle said, enunciating, that means speaking very clearly, enunciating very carefully, no, not exactly trouble, but we do have to key up after her to chew each mouthful 100 times. Sometimes she is forgetful and only chews her food about 93 times, and one day I caught her stopping at 71. Alan's mother could already picture how disastrous it would be if Alan heard that Pergola Wingsproggle chewed each bite 100 times, because if she multiplied each grain of mush in a dish by 100 and took into account the unbelievable slowness with which Alan was able to chew, she realized that he would die of slow starvation before the day had passed. Alan's mother hurriedly said goodbye to Mrs. Wingsproggle and hung up the phone. Then she called Patsy's mother. She said, Does Patsy eat everything that is put before her quickly and without urging? Patsy's mother said, Yes, she does. Why? Alan's mother said, Because Alan has taken to eating like a scared mosquito, and I don't know what to do. Patsy's mother said, Call Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. She'll know what to do. You remember the radish cure, don't you? Alan's mother was delighted. She said, Oh, of course I do, and I'll call Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle right now. And she did. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, So, Alan has become a slow eater, tiny bite taker, has he? I thought he looked a little pale this afternoon. Alan's mother said, "He is so pale his father calls him his little doughboy, and I know that he hasn't eaten more than a tablespoon of food in the last 2 days. What will I do, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle?" Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "Don't worry about Alan. He'll be all right again in a day or two. Let me see. Yes, it is Alan coming down the street right now. So I'll send home the slow eater, tiny bite taker dishes with him. Use the largest set for Alan's dinner tonight, the medium size for his meals tomorrow, the small size the next day, and the very small dishes the last day. Serve him portions of food that will fit the dishes. That will be 4 days in all, counting today. And though he may lose some weight, he will gain it right back. I may send for him on the last day, and no matter how he feels, let him come to my house." Alan's mother said, "Thank you very much, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. I'll do just what you say, and I will be so happy when he is cured." "I will send Alan right home with the dishes," said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. "Now don't worry. Simply follow my instructions." And Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said goodbye. After a little while, Alan came home carrying a large wicker basket. "Here's a present from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, Mother, and she said for me to be very careful with it." He set the basket on the kitchen floor and started to undo the fastenings. His mother said, "No, dear, this is a present for me, and I think I'll just put it aside for now. You run out and play until dinner. Goodness, you are pale. Run as fast as you can down to Patsy's house and put some roses into your cheeks." Do you know what that means? Is he going to put real flowers in his cheeks? She wants him to get outside and get some air so his cheeks get a little red. Some color. Alan's mother put the basket on the top shelf in the kitchen and shut the cupboard door, which left nothing for Alan to do but go out and play. However, instead of running down to Patsy's, he walked very, very slowly because he was tired from not having had enough to eat. Just before dinner, Alan's mother took down the basket and opened it. There were 4 little sets of dishes. The largest set had a plate the size of a saucer, a cup like a small after-dinner coffee cup, a small fork, and a little spoon. Now, I don't know how many of your parents have saucer dishes, but a long time ago, 1947, and I even have a set from when I got married, they would make coffee cups for eating for your set of dishes, and they would make a little saucer dish that the coffee cup sat on top of, so in case the coffee spilled, it would spill onto the little saucer dish. So a saucer dish isn't very big, so it's a lot smaller than a dinner plate. The medium-sized set had a plate like a doll plate, a doll cup, a very small fork and spoon. The small-sized set had a plate the size of a silver dollar. It's a little bigger than a quarter. A cup like a thimble, a fork like a match, and a spoon like a salt spoon. We don't use those very often, but it's not very big. The tiny-sized set had a plate the size of a penny, a cup that would hold but a drop, a fork like a needle, and a spoon like a pin. Alan's dinner that night was served on the large set. He was given a baked potato as small as an egg, a piece of meat like a postage stamp, a slice of tomato, and the small cup of milk. Alan was so interested in taking tiny bites that he didn't even notice his new dishes. He ate 1/3 of the potato, 1/6 of the meat, 1 tomato seed, and drank about half a cup of milk. When he asked to be excused, his father looked at his saucer plate still heaped with food and started to say no. But Alan's mother quickly said, Yes, dear, you may be excused, but you must play in your room until bedtime. The next morning his mother put a teaspoon of scrambled egg and an inch square piece of toast on the medium-sized plate and a tablespoon of orange juice in the doll cup. Alan loved the tiny fork and spoon because he was able to take such small bites that in 1 hour he had eaten but half the egg and 1/3 of the toast. He did drink all of the orange juice. At lunch and dinner he ate even less and took even smaller bites. He had turned a very pale green and was so tired he had to sit down all the time. The next day his mother brought out the small dishes. On the dollar plate she put 3 cornflakes, a piece of bacon the size of a snowflake, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of egg. In the thimble cup she put 10 drops of cocoa. Alan was so tired that he had to crawl into breakfast on his hands. He was happy about the tiny dishes, though, and gave his mother a very sickly edition of the shiny smile. He cut the cornflakes into 13 pieces and ate part of one. He ate a speck of egg, a nibble of bacon, and 5 drops of cocoa, and then crawled in and lay on the couch. For lunch he had 7 drops of soup, 2 cracker crumbs, and enough milk to barely moisten his lips. For dinner he ate 1 lima bean and drank 4 drops of milk. He crawled up to bed right after dinner. He had to rest 8 times on the way upstairs. The next morning he was so tired it took him almost half an hour to crawl down to breakfast. His mother had the penny plate, the drop cup, and the needle, fork, and pin spoon. On the penny plate she had 1 grain of egg, 2 toast crumbs, and 2 raspberry jam seeds. She had a drop of milk in the cup. Alan was so weak he had to lift the needle fork with both hands. But even so, he cut the 1 grain of egg in 2 and ate only 1 of the toast crumbs. He drank half the drop of milk and then lay down on the breakfast nook bench. Just then, the telephone rang, and it was Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle for Alan. His mother had to carry him to the telephone and hold the big, heavy telephone receiver. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle had a great difficulty hearing his weak, squeaky voice, and finally had to give up and talk to his mother. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "It is Alan's turn to exercise the spotted pony, and I would like him to come over here right away." Alan's mother told Alan, and he was very excited, but he was so weak that his mother had to carry him out and put him in his little red wagon. Fortunately, it was downhill all the way to Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's house, and when he got there, Dick Thompson and Hubert Prentice were waiting for him out in front. They lifted him out of his little red wagon and laid him across Spotty's back. Here's a picture of him laying across the back of the pony. Spotty turned his head around and licked the top of Alan's head for comfort. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle came out into her front porch to see him off, and it took much self-control to keep her from laughing as Spotty started slowly off down the street with Alan lying on his back like a bag of cornmeal. Ooh, remember cornmeal? That bag of cornmeal, where did we hear that? It was in the story of... Did you guess My Father's Dragon? All morning, Alan lay on Spotty's back, his face buried in his mane, while Spotty paced the streets. Several times, women rushed out of their houses and asked Alan if he was ill, if he needed any help. Alan was very embarrassed and squeaked out, "I'm all right," and tried to sit up, but he was too weak. When 12 o'clock came, Alan was so tired that he knew he could not stay on Spotty's back another minute, so he guided the pony up to his own front gate. Then he rolled off his back onto the grass. He lay there like a wet sock, bawling. His mother looked out the kitchen window, and seeing him lying there, she became frightened. She thought Spotty was a spirited horse, and that he had bucked Alan off. She ran out and knelt beside him. "Darling," she said, "are you hurt? Did that vicious horse throw you? How many times did he buck?" Alan smiled weakly at the idea of gentle little Spotty bucking or throwing anyone, but then he began to cry again as he remembered that this was his last chance for a long time to exercise Spotty, and he was so weak that he couldn't stay on his back. He finally said to his mother, "Spotty did not buck or throw me. It is just that I'm so tired I cannot stay on his back. I rolled off and now I can't get back on, and it's my turn to exercise him, and I won't have another turn for a long time." Alan's mother said, "Now see here, Alan, this all comes from your turning into a slow eater, tiny bite taker, and if you want to ride Spotty this afternoon, you will have to come into the house and eat something." She tied Spotty to the fence, picked Alan up, carried him into the house, and set him in the breakfast nook. He leaned weakly against the wall and closed his eyes. His mother began rattling pans and turning on burners, and pretty soon she handed him the drop cup filled with cream of tomato soup and the penny plate with 2 cracker crumbs on it. She said, "Now drink this soup in one gulp. Put both those cracker crumbs in your mouth at once." Alan did as he was told, then leaned back and closed his eyes again. Then his mother handed him the thimble cup filled with milk and a tiny peanut butter sandwich on the dollar plate. She said, "Drink this milk in one swallow and put that whole sandwich in your mouth." Alan did, and was surprised to find that he didn't feel quite so tired. He leaned back, but he kept his eyes open. Then his mother handed him the doll cup filled with soup and the doll plate with some cottage cheese on it. "Drink that soup right down," she said, "and here is a large fork, and I want that cottage cheese eaten in 2 bites." Alan did as he was told. But he was feeling strong. He could sit up without leaning back, and oddly enough, he was very hungry. His mother handed him the after-dinner coffee cup filled with milk and the saucer plate with a piece of gingerbread on it. Alan didn't have to be told how to eat and drink these. He took large, hungry bites and began swishing gulps, and the dishes were empty. His mother said, "Do you feel better, dear? Have you had enough lunch?" Alan said, "I feel much better, Mother, but I'm still very hungry. May I please have a large bowl of soup and a large glass of milk?" "Of course, dear," said his mother, and she quickly filled the large bowl with soup and a large glass with milk. Alan ate every drop of soup and drank every drop of milk, and then jumped up from the table saying, "Oh, Mother, I bet Spotty's hungry. Shall I take him some soup?" "No, dear," said his mother. "I think that Spotty would prefer an apple and some lumps of sugar." So they fed Spotty, and then Alan climbed on his back and rode proudly away, sitting up very straight and holding on to the reins with one hand. When he reached the corner by Patsy's house, his mother called him to come back. He turned Spotty around and steered him up to the gate, and his mother came out with a basket of slow-eater, tiny bite-taker dishes. "Would you mind returning these to Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle?" she asked. "Not at all," said Alan graciously. "Just hand me the basket. I'll put it here in front of me and hold it with this hand. You see, Mother, I only use one hand to steer now." He carefully arranged the basket, kissed his mother, clucked to Spotty, and away they went in a very slow walk toward Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's house. We have one more chapter. You'll have to turn in on Monday for the Fighter Quarreler's Cure. I'm guessing maybe some of your parents might be wanting to hear this too in this time of social distancing. After we're finished with this, Mrs. Wylick will be reading The Meanest Doll in the World. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.